Hi, I'm Arlena. My parents sent me a message while I was 38,000 feet in the air, closing a $1.23 billion deal. Don't get in the way of business. They gave my title to my sister, my signature to a stranger, my silence to a press release I never approved. I built the foundation. They handed her the spotlight. But the question that kept me up wasn't why. It was, how long had they planned for me to be invisible? 3 days before I was due to fly out for the biggest contract signing of my career, I sat alone in my apartment in San Francisco, half distracted by the hum of the dishwasher and the blinking cursor on my laptop. The email subject line read, Final, Signing Event Agenda, NYC. I clicked it open without hesitation, already picturing where my name would appear, likely after Valora's, but still there, still visible. But it wasn't. I scrolled twice, then again, slower. Nothing. Her name was there, though, in bold. Valora Belgrave, lead strategist. My fingers rested on the trackpad, frozen. I wasn't angry, not yet. It was more like the first moment you hear glass crack beneath your feet. Not a fall, just a shift. I opened my downloads folder and retrieved the earlier itinerary I'd saved from last week. I laid them side by side, scanning for any edits. My line item, Strategic Negotiation Lead, had been scrubbed. The rest of the formatting remained untouched. No official change notice, just gone. I didn't call anyone right away. Instead, I printed both versions and placed them on my kitchen table, one atop the other. The silence around me thickened, like fog settling on a cold coast. I stared at the paper for another 10 minutes, then finally reached for my phone. Corliss picked up on the third ring. Hi, Mom, I said, keeping my voice light. Sweetheart, she replied. Everything all right? I hesitated. I just received the final agenda for the New York signing. My name isn't listed under the speaking roles. There was a pause, a calculated one. This is Valora's time, she said. We didn't want too many voices. You know how crowded the stage can feel. I nodded, though she couldn't see it. So I'm not presenting at all. You'll be there, she answered. We just need you in a support role this time. Don't get in the way of business, Arlena. This isn't personal. The call ended shortly after, with her usual, we trust you'll make it seamless. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I just set the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the lights of the city blurred behind condensation. People moved, horns honked, life went on. Inside, I sat in silence. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened. A few years back, at the annual gala, they'd used my project as the keynote highlight, but introduced Valora on stage. She walked out in a white blazer, all smiles, while I was tucked backstage, holding the clicker for the slides. Back then, I told myself it was about optics. Tonight, I stopped lying to myself. It wasn't optics, it was a pattern. I opened my laptop again and scrolled through my personal folders, navigating to a document buried 5 levels deep. Clause 9, 22, Internal Security Backup. I reread the preamble I'd drafted 2 years ago, outlining the exact protocol for contract protection if misrepresentation occurred in upper management. At the time, they called me paranoid, over-engineered, unnecessary. Yet here I was, still standing, still unseen. A new email pinged from the PR team. The subject line, Support Role Confirmation. The body read, Hi, Arlena. Thanks for being flexible. Can you assist Valora with backstage logistics and press movement during the NYC event? I didn't reply immediately. I opened a fresh email, attached the clause document, and forwarded it to my private legal vault. Then, in a separate reply to PR, I typed, Confirmed. Logistics in place. I pressed print, and the document emerged from the tray. Warm, crisp, as if even the machine knew the weight of what it held. I folded it slowly and slipped it into the leather pouch I'd already packed for the trip. I didn't plan to use it, not yet. But I knew better than to show up empty-handed. The box was sitting on my front steps when I got home. No shipping label, no note on top. Just my name, handwritten in that stiff, careful way only my mother used when trying to appear warm without being sentimental. I carried it inside, setting it on the kitchen table like it might contain something fragile. Part of me already knew. I peeled back the lid and saw beige. A skirt suit. Conservative cut. Boxy shoulders. The kind of thing women wore in the early 2000s when trying not to offend anyone in the room. Folded neatly next to it was a printed note. Classic, appropriate for your role. Love, Mom. My role, not title, not contribution, just role. The fabric felt like insult disguised as decorum, and it wasn't even my size. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh either. I simply folded it back into the box and placed it beside my suitcase. That night, instead of packing, I sat on the floor next to the coffee table, flipping through my own pitch materials. The same ones I'd built from scratch, the ones I'd used to secure 3 global partners. I already knew they wouldn't see a screen in New York. The next morning brought more confirmation. A family strategy call had been scheduled, standard procedure before any major public-facing event. I logged in a few minutes early, hair pulled back, notes arranged, every contingency documented. Jareth, my father, appeared first on screen, wearing that always ready for TV smile. Then Corliss, behind a mug that said, "Women lead differently." Then Valora, pristine makeup, perfect lighting. No one greeted me. Jareth opened the call. "Let's finalize our messaging for the press conference. Valora, go ahead." Valora nodded like a student at graduation and launched into a monologue about vision, family legacy, and reclaiming our place at the head of the table. Her voice was smooth, full of buzzwords. I knew every phrase. I'd written half of them in internal briefs over the past 6 months. When she paused for feedback, I unmuted and offered a few adjustments. Just minor ones. Alignment with the client's terminology. A tweak in phrasing to avoid contractual ambiguity. Corliss interrupted before I finished. "That's not your lane, Arlena," she said. I stared at her. Clarifying the message isn't about lanes. It's about making sure we don't look like amateurs on camera. Jareth leaned forward. "We need presence, not precision. Valora has the tone we're going for." Valora didn't speak, just smiled, serene, superior, silent. I didn't argue. I hit mute again and sat back. The rest of the call passed like static. I heard words but didn't process them. I only caught fragments. Legacy push, external narrative, soft influence zones, meaningless, empty. After the call ended, I received a new email from the media team. Subject, final press package. I opened the attached PDF. Valora's name, lead negotiator. Feature photo, Valora, shaking hands with an overseas partner. Underneath, the driving force behind our expansion. My name didn't appear anywhere, not even in footnotes. I pulled up my own files, ones labeled Internal Deck, Strategy Phased Aside. Each slide, data model, and graph had my initials in the file properties. I'd even watermarked them, quietly, last year. Just in case. They hadn't deleted them. They'd buried them. I didn't reply. I copied every file to an encrypted drive labeled Echo Backup, then tucked that drive into my purse. Later that evening, while double-checking logistics with my assistant, he cleared his throat before speaking. "Just a heads up. They've moved your title on the itinerary. You're now listed under logistics support, press coordination, and floor transitions." "Thanks for letting me know," I said, my tone flat. After we hung up, I opened my Clause Archive folder again. Then I renamed it. Business Interference Preparedness. They were playing image. I was preparing infrastructure. They thought I was packing a suitcase. What they didn't see, what they never saw, was the weapon I'd wrapped in patience. The night before I flew to New York, I stopped by the PR floor to drop off a final checklist for media coordination. It wasn't required of me, but I knew better than to leave logistics in someone else's hands, especially when no one was planning to credit me if things went right. The hallway was unusually quiet. As I passed the glass conference room, I saw two interns hanging a new gallery installation. Legacy in Motion, it read. Family highlights, photos over the years, company milestones, all arranged in chronological order. And then I saw it. There was a photo I hadn't seen in decades. A family beach shot from when we were kids. Valora in the middle, holding a plastic shovel. My parents on either side, all smiles. But something was off. I wasn't in it. The original photo, burned into my memory, had me crouched beside Valora, our arms touching. I'd found that shell she was holding. But in this glossy, retouched version, I was gone. Cropped clean out like I'd never existed. I didn't say anything to the interns. I didn't ask questions. I pulled out my phone, snapped a picture, and walked away. When I got back to my floor, I sat at my terminal, staring at the screensaver until it dimmed. Then I logged in and opened the security archive. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was looking for confirmation. 2 weeks earlier, Valora had logged into the strategy archive, my archive. She didn't have full access, but she'd navigated the metadata, extracted elements from my Phase 3 expansion deck. I could see the exact timestamps, and I could match them to the visuals she now used in her speeches. The same graphs, fonts, even color schemes. She didn't just borrow, she repurposed my work and presented it as her own. I documented the access log, downloaded the screenshots, placed them in a folder labeled Legacy Interference, Tier 1. Then I sat in silence. I wasn't surprised. Not really. This wasn't new. It was just the most recent performance in a long-running show where I played the lighting tech while Valora stood center stage. 8 years ago, we pitched to the Fairborn Group, an investor meeting that could have folded the company or saved it. I stayed up 3 nights drafting the financial forecast, built the entire structure that convinced them to stay on board. I remember walking out of that room exhausted and invisible. 2 days later, Valora was on the company newsletter cover, the face of financial foresight. I didn't even make it into the caption. I'd asked my father about it once, just once. He'd looked at me, eyes full of corporate strategy and zero remorse, and said, "Your sister photographs better. That's not a criticism, it's positioning." I never brought it up again. Now, back in the present, I closed my laptop gently and pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was an encrypted offline vault. I placed the copied log file, the printed photo from PR, and the original time-stamped email approvals into a laminated binder. That night, I didn't go home. Instead, I stayed late, filling pages in my journal. Not out of anger, out of necessity. At the top, I wrote, "They erased me again, but this time, I am watching." I was halfway through listing every pattern they repeated when my phone buzzed. It was a system request. Valora was asking for access to the client onboarding portal, an area she had never handled before, and one that required dual authentication through my administrator key. I didn't reject the request. But it was close to midnight when the call came through on my business line, a line almost no one used unless it was urgent. I was sitting at my desk, finalizing a few backup files, already mentally ticking off what had to go in my carry-on. At first, I thought it was a glitch. The screen lit up, then flickered, and suddenly I could hear them. "As long as she doesn't ruin it," my mother's voice said, clear as if she were in the next room. "She's good with spreadsheets, that's her lane." Valora chuckled. "She'll show up, smile, and stay in her corner. That's what she's best at, quiet and useful." I didn't move, didn't speak. The call wasn't meant for me, but somehow, some divine misroading or careless oversight, it had landed on my desk. I hit record. They kept talking as if I didn't exist outside their script. Like I'd never stood behind every deal, every slide, every forecast that made this company worth saving. Valora. "Honestly, I think it makes her feel important. Let her organize press passes." Corliss. "Just make sure she doesn't overstep. The last thing we need is her tone in front of the cameras. I recorded 20 seconds. I could have taken more, but I'd heard enough. After I ended the line, I stared at the blinking, call-ended message on the screen. I thought of the suit, the stripped slide decks, the seating arrangement, all of it adding up to this moment. A window accidentally opened into how they rehearsed the story of me. I saved the audio under a new label, Legacy Override Tier 2. Then I texted Thayer. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a simple response. You always knew it. Now you've heard it. He didn't offer sympathy. That wasn't his style. Instead, he sent me a file, an excerpt from the legal clause I'd drafted on hostile misrepresentation during joint negotiations. I'd written the language as a preventative measure 2 years back, buried in an appendix of a compliance packet no one but Thayer had bothered to read. Now it was relevant. I pulled up my own clause archive and matched the language. It was airtight. By morning, the PR team was live streaming the pre-event campaign teaser. I didn't need to tune in, but I did. Valora stood in a sleek cream suit, hair professionally styled, speaking in that trained tone she used for public optics. I'll be leading this monumental signing on behalf of our family, she said. My parents always believed in my instinct. There was no mention of me, not even a nod. Behind her, the slides rolled through, showcasing brand colors, a few client logos, and then one of my charts. A graph I'd built from scratch, showing expansion across Q2 markets. I'd known every curve of that data. They hadn't even bothered to change the colors. I paused the live stream, screenshot the moment, and added the file to my archive. Dated. Time-stamped. I didn't scream. I didn't send emails. I didn't call anyone. I watched. Later that evening, I texted my mother. Just one line. Saw the live stream. Thanks for the clarity. Her reply came exactly 3 minutes later. Don't let emotions distract from your logistics role. We need calm support. I read it once, then printed it. Folded it into the same leather pouch that now held my clause binder and backup drive. Before I shut down for the night, my security badge pinged with an alert. A request for elevated permissions had been submitted under Valora's login. She wanted back-end access to the client signing system. I didn't reject it. I let it sit. And I started the clock. The sun hadn't fully risen when I stepped onto the corporate jet. The flight crew greeted Valora first, naturally. She walked in like she owned the cabin. Jareth followed right behind her, chatting with one of the international legal consultants as if the day was already his win. I hung back just long enough to avoid another staged photo op. There was a seating chart displayed on a small stand near the galley. My eyes scanned it without expectation. And yet, it still hit me harder than I admitted. Valora, row 1A, next to Jareth. Me, row 8C, back of the plane near the service cart. Next to my name, in smaller font, it read, Logistics Support. I didn't ask questions. I didn't pull anyone aside. I just walked back, set my carry-on under the seat, and pulled out my tablet. The woman seated next to me, someone from a third-party media firm, smiled politely and asked, You working the PR angle? Something like that, I replied. Then I opened the local version of my pitch deck and began scrolling. Everything I had built over the last 3 months was on that screen. Economic forecasts, strategy maps, negotiation anchors, slide after slide of work no one had even acknowledged in public. I closed the tablet when coffee service started. There was no use reviewing it now. Once we landed and reached the hotel, the PR team handed out welcome packets. Valora received hers in the car with Dad. Mine was waiting at the concierge desk, folded into a neutral envelope with a smiley face sticker on it, like it was an afterthought. Back in my room, I opened the packet. The event brochure listed Valora as Chief Strategist and Family Liaison. There were 3 pages of photo spreads featuring her shaking hands with CEOs I had spoken to for hours on end. I wasn't listed anywhere, not even under logistics. I flipped open my laptop and pulled up the shared drive. My presentation file, gone. replaced with a flashy PDF full of buzzwords, aspirational blurbs, and diagrams that made no sense. I opened the metadata log and checked the timestamps. The edit history confirmed it. My deck had been overwritten 48 hours ago. My work wasn't missing, it had been replaced. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't ask for it back. I created a new folder, offline, encrypted, and labeled it Original Pitch Tier 0. Then I uploaded every backup I had, time-stamped each file, and archived the whole structure on a private cloud drive with legal mirroring. 2 hours later, during the AV rehearsal at the ballroom, I arrived early to verify screen configurations. One of the tech assistants, clipboard in hand, pointed at the rear curtain. "You'll be stationed over there, behind the lighting rig, next to the tech liaison." I nodded. Understood. I stood in silence as Valora walked the stage like it was built for her. She practiced her lines with that polished rhythm I'd heard since we were kids playing courtroom in the living room. "Welcome to the future of our firm," she beamed into the mock camera setup. I tightened my grip on the remote in my hand. It wasn't even connected anymore. Just a prop now. Under my breath, I whispered, "That future still runs through my server." Later that evening, I sat alone in my hotel room. I didn't order dinner. I didn't return calls. I logged into my encrypted admin portal and navigated to the clause archive. After biometric verification, the system confirmed my access level, clause 922. Status, standby. I hovered for a second, then tapped Activate Contingent Ready Mode. The interface flickered. New status, ready. I closed the screen and locked the tablet. 15 minutes later, my phone lit up. Valora had submitted a request for elevated access to the back end of the client signing system, a request that required my silent approval. I didn't say no. I didn't say yes. I let it sit, and I started counting. At 8:15 that morning, just before the ballroom doors opened, a junior intern handed me a leather folder. "For you," she said politely, not quite looking me in the eye. I thanked her with a nod and stepped aside. The green room was buzzing with sound techs, coordinators, and staff whispering updates. I leaned against the far wall and opened the folder. Inside was the final signing packet. Printed, tabbed, initials on each page. My initials. Except I hadn't signed any of them. There they were, my full name, typed beneath a scanned signature I recognized as my own. But the document header read, Valora Belgrave, Strategic Negotiations Lead. Page after page, Valora's name was listed as the executing authority, and every signature block bore a copy of my digital mark, scanned, copied, and placed without consent. I didn't say a word. I pulled out my phone, photographed the signature lines, then flipped to the metadata summary page, time-stamped, archived, and cross-referenced against document history. 5 minutes later, I uploaded the photos to my secure cloud log under a new tag, Clause Docker 9, 122, Activation. Then I stepped quietly into the corridor just outside the green room, where no one was watching. Out of sight, I opened my tablet and logged into the administrative dashboard. After biometric verification and two-factor clearance, the clause I'd built nearly 2 years ago appeared in full. Contingency protocol, interim custodial freeze. Status, standby. I tapped once. New status, active, silent mode. That was all. No alarms, no visible disruption, no dramatic countdown. Just a digital curtain quietly descending. The system rerouted access credentials, suspended the contract execution layer, and triggered a back-end investigation log. Back inside the green room, everything still looked perfect, for a moment. By 8:45, Valora was standing on stage for the press pre-roll. Cameras adjusted, microphones checked, lights adjusted to catch her best angle. Then her mic popped. Just once, a sharp, piercing static burst. She flinched, smiled, and tried again. This is a historic moment. The screen behind her flickered, then froze. The image, a title slide that read, Welcome to the Future of... and nothing more. A rotating buffer icon replaced the rest of the sentence. One of the AV staff turned to me. "We're checking the sync. Might be a cloud delay." I took a sip of water. Valora powered through. She tried to pivot, talking through the glitch. That's when the signature display behind her blinked off entirely. A legal assistant approached from the right of the stage and whispered something into Jareth's ear. His brow furrowed. He looked at Valora, then at me. "We're locked out of the signature chain," the assistant said louder this time. Valora paused mid-sentence. "Excuse me?" The assistant repeated. "There's a validation issue. Credentials aren't clearing the back end." Valora looked across the room. Our eyes met. "What did you do?" she mouthed. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I mouthed back. "You did." She took a step forward, off balance. Her expression, part confusion, part panic. Then a second figure approached the board table. It was our head of security. He leaned in toward the microphone at the center of the board's reserved row. "We'll need to postpone the digital signing," he said calmly, professionally, "until credential verification completes." That was it. No shouting, no accusations, no pointing fingers. Just silence, and a process no one but me truly understood. I didn't steal anything. I simply built a mirror and let the system show them what was really there. The press conference room hadn't cleared out entirely. Lights still buzzed overhead, half-dimmed. The branded step and repeat backdrop stood untouched in the corner, waiting for a photo opportunity that would never come. What lingered wasn't silence. It was static. That charged kind of quiet you get after a lightning strike, when no one knows if it's really over. I stood near the back wall, watching Valora huddled with our parents. Corliss was whispering something with narrowed eyes. Jareth gestured toward the board table, tense but measured. I knew that body language. They were building a narrative. Less than 10 minutes later, it started to spread. First through a hushed comment at the media desk, then among two staffers in the hallway. Internal override, maybe, not official sabotage, but she's always been territorial, might have panicked. By the time I returned to the staging corridor, a reporter I'd met before looked at me strangely. "You're not listed in the schedule anymore," he said. "Were you part of the signing process?" I didn't respond. He wasn't asking for clarification. He was waiting for a quote to fuel the version they'd just been handed. My phone buzzed with a forward from an anonymous account. It was an internal email draft. The subject line read, "Urgent, disruption, likely due to Arlena's resistance." In the body, "Pending confirmation, Arlena Belgrave may have engaged contingency code activation in error or in response to internal conflict. Recommend strategic distancing from her role during press coverage." They were blaming me for the system lockout, for their own signatures, for their own lies. I didn't reply. I didn't flinch. I walked straight to the legal conference room, used my override badge, and locked the door behind me. Thayer was already inside, reviewing logs. "They're baiting you," he said without looking up. "They want emotion. Give them data instead." I slid a flash drive across the table. 4 logs, 3 access timestamps, 1 clause activation protocol, all signed. We didn't waste time. Together, we built a compressed packet. Compliance Archive, Tier 1, stamped in the file name. It contained 4 key files. Clause 9.22, signed by the board 2 fiscal years ago. Valora's device access attempt timestamped at 6:42 a.m. The draft contract with my original clause, headers intact. A chain of error reports from the system showing override conflict. By 1:30 p.m., the archive was uploaded, anonymously, to the internal Slack channel used by department heads. No captions, no commentary, just the truth. 30 minutes later, someone from finance messaged Thayer with one word. Saw. By 3:00 p.m., compliance called off their inquiry. By 3:15, the building began to shift. No one said anything to my face, but they watched me differently. Not with pity, not with sympathy, with calculation. Like they were finally realizing the floor they stood on wasn't just made of carpet and steel. It was made of people like me. And I had built it silently. Corliss passed me in the hallway, but didn't make eye contact. Jareth brushed by in the stairwell without a word. I didn't stop either of them. At 4:22 p.m., Valora texted me, "You crossed a line." I replied 3 minutes later, "No, I verified where it was." I said nothing else after that. But the system, my system, wasn't done speaking. By mid-morning, the executive boardroom was full, but no one looked at each other. The air had shifted, more humid than tense, more wary than collaborative. Jareth was already seated at the head of the table, fingers steepled like a man preparing a closing argument. Valora stood behind him, whispering into Corliss's ear. I walked in last, unhurried, with a printed packet in hand. No greetings, no explanations. I slid the documents across the table, stopping them just short of the board chair. You might want to review Clause 922 before today's press goes live, I said. No one moved at first. Then a rustle of paper. Someone gasped. Another cleared their throat. 2 board members flipped open the printed packet. One adjusted his glasses. Another pulled out his phone to check the internal archive. Jareth's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Valora shifted beside him, her arms crossed. This is a distraction, she said. This isn't the time. This is the only time, I said, my voice level. You wanted visibility. Here it is. Before anyone could respond, a knock on the door signaled the AV team. It was time for the public signing stream to begin. We filed into the main presentation room. Valora walked out first, shoulders back, chin up, the image of composed leadership. The cameras rolled. The music cued. She approached the podium with practiced grace. Then the screen behind her flickered. It blinked, paused, then blacked out. She smiled, attempting to recover. A brief tech hiccup, she joked into the mic. The backup screen powered on, only to stall on a loading icon. Valora turned to the audience again. While the slides load, let me share. Static cut her off mid-sentence. Her mic glitched again. She adjusted the wire on her blazer, forced another smile. I remained seated near the control booth, hands folded in my lap. Behind Valora, the placeholder slide came back online, except this time it read, Signatory access validation, failed. A ripple ran through the crowd. One investor leaned forward. Someone from the compliance team frowned and tapped a device. Valora faltered. Her smile dropped an inch. She glanced toward the side of the stage, eyes scanning until they landed on me. I didn't blink. Her lips moved. What did you do? I shook my head slowly. No, I mouthed. What did you do? She looked like a curtain being pulled from a window, not yanked, but slowly, steadily, exposing everything behind it. She reached for her cue cards, but her hand trembled, scattering them across the floor. Her voice cracked as she tried to continue. We are prepared to lead into... Jareth stepped forward then, taking the mic. We're experiencing a minor technical issue, he said. Someone from the legal team walked briskly to the side and whispered in his ear. This is an administrative lockdown, she said. We can't proceed. The room fell into a heavy silence. Valora turned to me again, this time not with blame, but panic. I didn't move, no gloating, no raised eyebrow, just stillness. As the board shuffled and the PR team whispered frantically, the chair of the board walked over and said quietly, Stay after, alone. Once the crowd cleared and cameras were powered down, I remained in my seat. The chair returned with 2 other members, one holding the packet I'd delivered earlier. We reviewed the clause, the chair said. You're the official signatory of record. The contract can't go forward without your clearance. I nodded. Not a thank you. Not a smile, just a nod. On my way out, my phone buzzed. An anonymous email, no text, just an attachment, footage from the night before. Jareth, in the rehearsal space, reading Valora's lines aloud, coaching her on delivery, the same speech I had written, word for word. They didn't trust her to think. They only trusted her to perform, and I had trusted them to see the difference. I didn't need revenge. They buried the truth, so I simply unearthed it. The boardroom was quiet again, but this time there was no tension. Just something like unease masked as formality. The air conditioning clicked on. The blinds hummed as they lowered slightly to keep the sun off the presentation screen no one had touched in hours. I sat across from two board members and the company's general counsel. The signing event was officially postponed, but the fallout had only begun. They reviewed logs, timeline reports, compliance notices. One board member rubbed the bridge of his nose and finally said, "We owe you more than an apology." I folded my hands on the table. I didn't ask for one. They didn't argue. On the way out, I passed a group of department leads gathered near the elevator. A few offered awkward nods. Others glanced away. News travels fast in buildings like ours, especially when it involves family, especially when it disrupts what everyone assumed was untouchable. By the time I got to my floor, the shift was obvious. People didn't avoid me, but they didn't engage either. They studied me like I was a quiet earthquake that might start trembling again at any moment. When I opened the door to my temporary office, a single note was left on my desk. Handwritten on a yellow post-it. "Thank you for protecting what matters." No name, no initials, just that. I pressed the note into the corner of my journal. No ceremony, no smile. But something in my shoulders finally dropped. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like release. 2 hours later, my inbox pinged with an HR notice. Valora had filed for medical leave, effective immediately. I turned toward the window. From where I sat, I could see the curbside exit. 10 minutes later, a car pulled up. Valora stepped inside with her assistant beside her, carrying her bags. Her hair was still perfect, her posture still controlled. But her eyes, they scanned the building once, then landed on mine. She didn't wave, I didn't either, but I nodded. Not in victory, not in anger, just a small human acknowledgement of an ending, and maybe a kind of freedom. Later that afternoon, HR sent me a calendar hold for a policy review session, focused on executive signing protocol. I accepted, but added one condition, that all legacy policies be reviewed, clause by clause. No shortcuts this time. Around 6 p.m., I returned to my office to pack up. My day had ended, technically, but my phone buzzed with a final notification before I could leave. A legal envelope was waiting in my personal inbox. It came from the firm's founding trust. Inside, a formal letter, notarized, dated 3 years ago. It read, "In the event of an operational breach or failure of ethical leadership, executive authority shall pass to the designated successor trustee, Arlena Belgrave." I stood still in the room, the hum of the building faint in the background. They'd named me years ago. All this time, it had never been about being chosen. I was already written in. I folded the letter gently and placed it inside the folder that now held Clause 922, the compliance archive, and that single yellow note. Then I said aloud, quietly, "It was never about becoming them. It was about surviving them." Monday morning arrived with a corporate memo so vague, it might as well have been printed on tissue paper. Following recent procedural discrepancies, it read, "Leadership acknowledges the need for revised alignment protocols across all departments. We thank our team for their flexibility." No names. No mention of the contract that collapsed on livestream. No word on the clause that saved the company from a legal meltdown. And certainly no reference to the person who triggered that clause with a silent swipe of her thumb. I didn't get angry. I screenshotted it. Saved it in a folder titled Formal Gaslighting Memo 1. Then I forwarded the image to my attorney with a 3-word message. "This will age." An hour later, I received a notification from the PR team. They were preparing a legacy content piece for shareholders, an email newsletter meant to stabilize public perception after the glitch. I opened the attached preview and saw Valora's name, again, at the center of the page. Valora Belgrave, lead for global expansion. No edit, No note, no change. I stared at it for a full minute before dragging it into my private compliance binder, labeling it Misattribution Pattern 4. Later, when the PR team reached out for final approval of the piece, I responded simply, "No correction needed. Truth is self-updating." By mid-afternoon, I received an invitation. Not from them, but from HR, Quarterly Planning Council. My name was listed as Interim Executive Signatory. The title didn't shake me. It didn't flatter me either. It just fit, like a coat I'd been wearing the whole time. Only now someone had finally noticed the label inside. I showed up 5 minutes early. My seat, center left, across from the compliance director, had a placard with my full name in crisp block lettering. No one greeted me. No one asked for a recap of the last few days. But they listened when I spoke. I walked them through a series of recommended audits, legacy decision chains that had bypassed policy, familial influence embedded into approval routes. I called for a review, clause by clause, of executive powers buried under language like trusted channels and historical guidance. At the end, one of the older board members leaned back and murmured, "Not to me, but to the room. This should have happened a long time ago." That night, after dinner, I made tea and opened my laptop to check one last round of emails. At the top was a new message. No subject. No sender ID. Inside was a single link. Twitter. I clicked. The post was already going viral. A side-by-side clip. Valora on stage, rehearsing the deal pitch last week. And next to it, a screen recording of the original clause draft I'd written, opened line by line from my archived document. No commentary, no hashtag, just timestamps, footage, files. I didn't share it. I didn't retweet it. But within minutes, my inbox lit up. "We see you now? Thank you for protecting the structure." Real leadership never needed the spotlight. Then, as I was about to close the laptop, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I answered. "Arlena Belgrave?" a calm voice asked. "This is Lauren from the Founders Trust. We'd like to schedule a formal meeting to discuss succession logistics, not just clause execution, but full designation." I didn't speak at first. I just listened to the hum on the other end of the line. Then I said, "Send a time." I didn't rise because they welcomed me. I rose because I stopped waiting for permission. The air in the executive wing felt unfamiliar when I returned, though the scent of polished wood and recycled climate control hadn't changed. What was missing was the nameplate outside Valora's old office. No plaque, no explanation. Just an empty wall where something once claimed permanence. People looked up from their desks as I passed. Some gave small nods. Others quickly pretended to be reading. No one spoke, not yet. My office was the one next door. Assigned, not requested. The door creaked slightly when I pushed it open. Inside, it smelled of nothing, still air, neutral carpet, unused space. The desk was bare except for the monitor and keyboard. No name tag, no family photos, no branding. I reached into my bag and pulled out the yellow Post-it I'd kept tucked in my folder since the day after the collapse. "Thank you for protecting what matters." I pressed it to the bottom corner of the screen. That was enough. Later that morning, the Leadership Council gathered. No press, no stream. The chairs formed a circle this time, not the usual rigid boardroom rectangle. It was a small but deliberate choice. A silent vote began, followed by even quieter murmurs about restructuring executive authority protocols. I didn't interrupt. I didn't advocate. I waited. When it was my turn, I stood. My voice didn't tremble. I didn't raise it either. "I'd like to propose a formal recognition audit," I said, "across all departments. Contributions documented, not assumed. Approvals traceable, not inherited." A pause followed. Then one of the longer-tenured directors leaned back and said, almost to himself, "We should have done that years ago." No one laughed. No one objected. After the meeting ended, I was halfway through reviewing follow-up notes when a knock sounded at my office door. I looked up. It was Jareth. He didn't enter. Just stood in the doorway like a man not sure he belonged in the room he built. "I won't stay long," he said. I didn't invite him in. I just nodded once. "You proved your point," he said quietly. I tilted my head. "I didn't prove anything. I just stopped pretending not to know." He nodded. Once. Then left. There was no apology, no anger, just the weightless click of shoes on hallway tile fading behind the door. That night, I walked past the main conference room on my way to another meeting. The updated leadership display had already been mounted. Strategic Director, Permanent, Arlena Belgrave. I didn't stop. I didn't pull out my phone to take a picture. I didn't need to. I'd already seen the truth. That was enough. Down the hall, a new group was waiting. Junior associates, first-time team leads, and a handful of young women who were scheduled to be onboarded into management training. I stepped into the room. Before I closed the door, I turned briefly and said just loud enough for the assistant director beside me to hear, "We're not rewriting the legacy. We're correcting the authorship." Sunday mornings in my apartment had always been the quietest. It wasn't the kind of quiet you get from being alone. It was the kind that settles when the noise finally gives up. 2 weeks had passed since the board vote. No more strategy meetings, no whispers in hallways. Just a steady hum of transition, subtle but permanent. That morning, a courier dropped off a white envelope with no return address. The seal carried the crest of the firm's founding trust. I recognized it instantly. Inside was a notarized letter, a sealed amendment dated nearly 5 years ago from the founder himself. It read, "In the event of ethical breach or procedural compromise, executive legacy decision rights shall pass permanently to Arlena Belgrave. No frills, no commentary, just confirmation." I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just breathed. I set the letter down beside the window, letting the soft light stretch across its edges. Outside, the skyline moved like it always did, oblivious, unbothered. I opened the drawer under the window bench and placed the envelope in a lockbox. It sat beside the original clause draft, the time-stamped archive drive, and that yellow post-it from a junior associate who would never know how much that line, "Thank you for protecting what matters," had steadied me when no one else did. Later that afternoon, I checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts from Valora, no email from Corliss, nothing from Jareth. But silence wasn't strange anymore. I opened an old voice memo in my archive, one I hadn't dared to touch since it landed in my inbox the month everything fractured. A saved message from our mother, sent years earlier. "Support your sister," she'd said in her usual firm tone. "Even if it cost you the spotlight, it's what family does." I listened once, then again. I didn't delete it. I archived it. Letting go doesn't always mean erasing. Sometimes it just means choosing not to carry it anymore. The next day, the firm hosted an executive summit. New leadership, new partners, fresh agendas. I was on the docket but chose to sit in the third row, not at the head table. One of the event planners spotted me and approached, flustered. "Ms. Belgrave, we have a seat for you at the front." "I'm fine here," I said. People noticed anyway. They always do when silence holds more gravity than position. Midway through the summit, during a Q&A session, a young woman approached me during the break. New hire, nervous hands. "I just wanted to say," she whispered, "you made it possible for people like me to be seen." I thanked her. No speech, no lesson, just presence. As the session ended, I walked through the lobby, past the glass wall where Valora once hosted panels. Her name had been removed. No replacement yet. I stepped outside into the late afternoon air, carrying nothing but my phone and a leather-bound notebook. At the corner across from the building, I paused. It was the same street where I'd once stood behind the line, badge clipped to my belt, holding someone else's papers, smiling while they waved. I didn't look back. I kept walking. I was never waiting for a spotlight, I whispered to myself. I just stopped dimming my own light to make others comfortable. Sometimes legacy isn't given. It's preserved by the quiet ones who refuse to be erased. I used to think power came from being chosen, from being named, called forward, invited. But what I've learned is that real strength, lasting, quiet strength, comes from knowing who you are, even when no one claps for it. Legacy isn't always passed down with ceremony or recognition. Sometimes it's built in silence, brick by brick, act by act. And the people who build it? They don't always wear titles, but they carry the weight of everything that holds. If you've ever sat in a room where your work was praised, under someone else's name, if you've ever been told to stay in your lane, to keep your voice down, to not get in the way of business, I see you. And maybe this story reminded you of someone. Maybe it reminded you of yourself. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? I'd love to know. Have you ever had to choose silence just to keep peace? Or have you ever been erased only to rebuild yourself louder, stronger, without asking for applause? If this video spoke to something inside you, drop a 1 in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. If you didn't like it, I'd still love to hear why. What didn't land for you? Let's talk. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about real people navigating dignity, silence, and strength, please hit that subscribe button. You never know. The next one might be your story too.